Okay. Okay. Erev Tov. It's good to see all of you, especially some people that I haven't seen in a good while, and other people that I keep meaning to be in touch with, and somehow I don't know, it doesn't happen.
We should unmute ourselves to reduce the noise.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can mute all.
Bye.
I have so much power, I can mute everybody. Now I just shut you all up. Okay, but if you want to talk, just press the microphone. It's okay. All right. First of all, I'll let you in on the surprise before we start the topic. And that is that you are a very, very unique group, and you're going to do something that no other group in history has ever done before. Okay? The text that I sent, the English translation of the introduction and the conclusion to the book that we're going to study parts of, it's called Sefer Hamidot. We'll talk about the title and what it means in a minute. But that text that I gave to you, you are going to be the first people in the history of humanity, okay, to study the conclusion to this book. No one has ever studied it before, except me. Okay, and the way that happened, let me just let Simcha in. The way she's joining, wait. All right, I'll just let it take its time. The way that happened is that the end of the book was missing in all manuscripts and in all printed versions of the book. And I found a manuscript that contains the oldest extant manuscript of the book. It was written in 1430, the year 1430, nearly 600 years ago, or 590 years ago to be precise. And in that manuscript, it contains the end of the book. So I transcribed the end of the book from the manuscript, and then I edited it. And more recently, I'm completing an article on it in English, which contains both the Hebrew transcription and an English translation of it. But even though this is a very popular book that has been translated into various languages and was published over 100 times in Hebrew, and is studied by almost anyone who studies Jewish ethics, nevertheless, none of them have ever studied the conclusion to the book. Okay, I'm going to show this to you visually, including to the people here. This is Don's edition of the book. Okay, it's the second Hebrew-English version of the book, the second English translation. The book was translated into English twice already. The first was by a man named Seymour Cohen, and this one, as you can see, was translated by Shraga Silverstein, okay, a bit more recently by Feldheim Publishing. The fact that it was even translated into English at all, let alone that it was translated into English twice, shows you that there's a lot of interest in the book. It's also been translated into Spanish. It was also translated more than 100 years ago into German. And that's actually a cool thing. It was translated into German for a Rothschild whose first name I can't remember, but he was a traditional member of the Rothschild family. He remained Orthodox in Germany. The rest of the Rothschild family didn't remain traditional. And the translation into German of this book was dedicated to him, to this Rothschild descendants. He might have contributed money to get it published, for all I know, but I didn't go that deeply into it. In any case, in this version, you will not find the conclusion to the book. And in any published version, you will not find the conclusion to the book. You will only find the conclusion to the book in the WhatsApp of Midreshet Hakerem in English. Okay, it exists nowhere else on planet Earth. or elsewhere in the universe. Okay? This is Don's version of the book. Miriam's asking to look at it. Okay, you can buy it on the internet if you want a translation of the book. Please return it when you're done because I want to show people things further. All right, so that's first of all about the conclusion of the book. Now we'll get more into the actual topic by talking about the title of the book. Okay, what is the title of the book that we're about to study? So I told you that its title in Hebrew is Sefer HaMidot. But if Miriam, who is sitting here, looks at the book that she has in her hand, she'll see that that's not the title that appears. Miriam, what title appears? The ways of the tzaddikim, the ways of the righteous. The ways, W-A-Y, not W-A-Z-E, W-A-Y-S, the ways of the righteous. Now, the ways of the righteous is, not only is it not the original title of the book, it's actually a highly misleading title to the book. The book shouldn't be called that, and there's a reason why the book's author didn't call it that. And as we begin to talk about the title of the book and what the book is about, okay, then we will begin to understand why that is not such a good title. Let's talk about the actual title. Sefer HaMidot, the book of the Midot. In order to get what that title means, we have to understand what midot are. So what are midot? What do you people think midot are? Traits, says Miriam. Character traits, says Tzvi.
Qualities.
Qualities, says Marian.
I always thought it was values and ethics.
Values and ethics.
Ethics,
says
it's like that, all that philosophy, yeah.
A nice fancy word for what all of you are trying to say in English is dispositions. Okay, human dispositions. And yet, anyone who speaks even a little bit of Hebrew, or even just reads, older Hebrew texts, knows that midot can mean something totally different than that. What else does midot mean in Hebrew?
Measurements.
Like, what kind of measurements?
Lengths.
But I'm thinking the expression, like Marian's saying, also length, like Yeshli midah gdola, chutza midah gdola. It's a big size shirt, right?
It could be your shoe size.
Right, midah, whatever.
It could be your dress size.
Right.
It could be what?
No, I was going to say, right, it could be your size. But another thing I was thinking of was ani ohevet zeh b'midah rabah. I love this in a great midah. I don't know how exactly you would translate it. I'm not sure, but midah rabah.
So yeah, that's nice. When an Israeli says b'midah rabah ani maskim lecha, something like that.
Right.
When an Israeli says that I agree with you, b'midah rabah, it means to a large degree. In other words, degree, we're using midah in terms of quantity. It could be quantity in terms of the length of your foot. Okay, it could be quantity in terms of the size of a bedroom in an apartment. Okay, it could be a quantity in terms of the width of a highway. Okay, all of these things are things that you could use the word midah for. And now this just begs the question, because if we look in the earliest text that we have, which is the Mikra, the Bible. Okay, we see midah being used there as simply a measurement. Okay, how long something is, how wide it is, how tall it is. Okay, in the Mishnah, which comes after the Bible, you actually have an entire tractate, which is called Masechet Midot. The tractate of Midot. What do you think that tractate is about?
Oh, what's an accurate weight measurement? What's how to? I'm just guessing because the rabbis with Torah and the rabbis are certainly very dedicated to truth and all
Yeah.
that. So they want to say like to do this in the right midah. Well, if you're selling some onions, this is the way you should do. I mean, I made that one up. But
So it has to do with honest weights and measures for a grocer, you're saying.
right. That's what I'm thinking. It's part of it.
Okay, it is used that way, but it's
Mhm.
not used that way in Masechet Midot.
Oh, okay.
But Masechet Midot, you're correct about the usage, but Masechet Midot is talking about something else. Masechet Midot is found in the order. There's 6 orders of the Mishnah, like we sing on Passover. All right, and it's in the order of Kodashim, of holy things, which has rules about the temple. So now what do you think Masechet Midot, Tractate Midot is about?
Qualities.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Sounds like Pirkei Avot, though. Good person is this, bad person is that.
Oh, the word midah is used in Pirkei Avot for like human dispositions.
Okay,
It is used
okay.
that way. But
Okay.
the actual tractate called Midot uses it in a different way. Not in tractate.
The measure of a person. I
Not
mean,
the
this is Kayla. Are
Kayla,
there?
yes.
I mean, perhaps as the measure, we would say the measure of man or the measure of a person, as
Right.
in, maybe different character traits are given
Yeah,
different.
That is what Tzvi is suggesting, and both of you are right. Midah is used for the measure of a man, for human qualities, and yes, that's how it's going to be used in our book. But I'm asking a question about that. I'm saying that there is a far more frequent use of the word midah, both in modern Hebrew and in the Bible and in the Mishnah, which has nothing to do with human beings. So all right, so it's in the order of Kodashim, the order of holy things, which discusses the temple and the activities in the temple. And in that order, you have a tractate called Midot. What might it be talking about in the context of holy things? So Don is suggesting it's levels of holiness. It's actually not. It's something far more down to earth. It's simply, the whole tractate Midot is simply about measurements, physical measurements of the Temple Mount, of the temple itself, of the vessels within the temple, and where, if you measure, where they're supposed to be positioned. That's what Tractate Midot is about. It has nothing to do with ethics, nothing to do with the measure of a man, nothing to do with virtue or vice, right? It's just about how many cubits, width and how many cubits height, okay? And it's also used that way in the Bible. That's the usual use in the Bible. It's the most frequent use in the Mishnah, even though in the Mishnah, like Tzvi and Kayla said correctly, you do, in certain circumstances, have the word midah being used for something more human or interpersonal or spiritual, right? The qualities of a human being. And so why? Why would the Hebrew language take a word, okay, which is mostly connected to measuring physical things, length, width, height, weight, okay, and take that word and start using it for ethics? What does a ruler have to do with ethics? A yardstick have to do with ethics.
The first thing that comes to my mind is that the Torah says many times about acting. It doesn't use the word ethics in the Torah, of course not, but it says like yashar, just about that, to be yashar. I mean, the word for straight, literally, that is used. You know, derech yashar, whatever. And so maybe midot and yashar, you know, I can see the connection there, perhaps.
ועשית הישר והטוב
Right,
בעיני אדוני אלוהיך.
right.
Do what is straight and good in the eyes of the Lord your God. That's a
Right.
nice example, Tzvi. There you have an example of the Bible taking a word whose primary meaning is just physical measurements, like something is straight or crooked physically, right? And using it metaphorically for human behavior. That human behavior can also be either straight or crooked, even though, of course, human behavior, you know, it's not geometrical. Okay,
Right.
so that's a very nice example. You're saying that the same thing that happened with the word midah, right, happened with the word yashar in a similar way. Again. So now Don, he really gets to the guts of the issue. He says that behavior is something which is measurable in principle. Okay? It can be quantified, it can be qualified. You can look at a person, right? And you can say, record their behavior over a period of time. And from the behavior, you can begin to quantify their inner tendencies. Okay? If you film somebody, say for a month, okay, and this person has angry fits all the time, okay, then you can quantifiably say, you can't. It's not that you can just say, well, this person gets angry a lot. Rather, the getting angry a lot testifies to something going on inside. Okay? You can testify from the behavior that something inside of that person tends towards anger. Okay? You can sort of measure where the person is on the scale between anger and between, what's the word I'm looking for? Between contentness, let's say. Okay? Yes? Okay, I mean, Miriam is, I think, saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that people have a choice. In other words, you can have an angry person, but the angry person can change, right? So if I've measured that person for a month, I don't know what that person will be next year, but I may be able to say something about the inner qualities of that person for the past month, for that period. Yeah. Okay. You could also say, by the way, that I'm wrong about the period. You know, you could have a person who's rather content, and a person who doesn't often get angry and who won't be angry next year. But this past month just had so many tense, harsh challenges that the person got angry a lot. Maybe. Okay. All right. So yeah, yes. No, nothing. Okay. So we have a book called Sefer Hamidot, the Book of Character Traits. We'll translate it that way. And that is its title. Fine, that's its title. Now, for I think all of us sitting here, what that means is that once upon a time, there was a person who wanted to talk about ethics. So this person sat down and wrote a book called, and gave the book the title, Sefer Hamidot, the Book of Character Traits, because it's a book about character traits. And that's the book, and that's the title, and that's the name of the author. The only problem is that this book gets a lot more complicated. First of all, we don't know the name of the author. Okay, the author is anonymous. And we can venture a guess, can't prove it, but we can venture a guess that the author is anonymous on purpose. that the author somehow in the Middle Ages managed to release a copy of this book without his name on it. And don't tell me I'm being sexist by saying he instead of she, because if it's anonymous, maybe it was a female author. I can prove that the author was male, okay? Just based on the content of the book, okay? If it had been a woman writing the book, a lot of things would have come out differently, okay? It's from the perspective of a male. The book was early on, very early on, translated into Yiddish, and it was translated into Yiddish for women, okay? The first Yiddish edition is even dedicated to a woman, okay? So we have both male and female in the history of it. The original Hebrew was apparently by a man addressed to men, and then the Yiddish adaptation was addressed to a woman. Who knows? Maybe it was dedicated to a woman. Maybe it was even written by a woman. I have no idea. But we have this book, and you think, okay, that's the book. It was written by an author, and that's the title the author gave the book. There's only one problem with this, okay? There are quite a few books by Jews in the Middle Ages that are called Sefer Hamidot. Maimonides in one place even refers in the generic to Sifrei Hamidot, the books of Midot. In other words, that more than one person has written in this genre, okay? More than one person has sat down and attempted to write a book about the various character traits that people have. Okay, so when you write a book called Sefer Hamidot, you're taking the title of an entire genre and using it as the title of your book, and that complicates things. There's a bunch of books in Hebrew that have almost the same title. There's Sefer Ma'alot Hamidot, which was written in I believe, the 14th century. Okay, if it's the Ma'alot Hamidot, I'll explain something further to understand this title. When we said Midot, you all answered like character traits and things like that correctly. Okay, but in English, when we talk about these kinds of books of ethics, like humility versus pride and generosity versus stinginess and stuff like that, we generally don't talk about them as character traits. The classical terms are the virtues and the vices. Okay? If you read Aristotle, okay? Aristotle has a book, The Ethics. Okay? What is the topic of the ethics? It's the virtues and the vices. And in all European languages that I've seen, okay, it's always the positive and the negative, the virtues and the vices. Now in Hebrew, the word midot is neutral. You can have midot that are negative, or you can have midot that are positive, right? So how come if Aristotle talked about virtues and vices, when his book was translated into Hebrew in the Middle Ages, it was translated as Sefer HaMidot. Midot doesn't tell you virtues and vices. Midot is neutral. What had to happen in Hebrew was that you qualified it. If you want to talk about the virtues and the vices in Hebrew, you have to use the words midot tovot, good midot, that means virtues, or midot ra'ot, bad midot, that means vices. So the reason, yes.
Well, I was going to suggest that it goes back even to a philosophical difference between Jews and non-Jews.
Yeah.
Which is that we wouldn't, because we have a choice, there's a difference between something that is inherent versus something that is choice.
Yeah.
And non-Jews might see it as inherent and we would see it as choice, perhaps.
All right, I see where you're going.
That behavior one is about behavior, one is about personality, let's say attributes. That can, but one has a chance to then overcome one's attributes or modify one's attributes.
Okay. Kyle, I see where you're going, but you have to remember that non-Jews are not monolithic. There's all kinds of non-Jews, just like there's all kinds of Jews. One second. The non-Jew, okay, who wrote the book on the ethics was Aristotle. And Aristotle was of the opinion that human beings have freedom of choice. Okay. That's the basis of his whole book. Now that book, that book, by the way, was one of two books that talked about ethics and society and relationships between people that had an enormous impact on what's called political philosophy in the Middle Ages. Okay, believe it or not, ethics in the Middle Ages was part of political philosophy. As opposed to things that we think nowadays of as like the natural sciences, physics, biology, and things like that. Okay, that's what most of the books of Aristotle were about. But there were two books of Greek philosophy that had an enormous impact on the Middle Ages. On political philosophy, not on physical sciences. Those two books were number one, the Republic of Plato, and the second one was the ethics, the Nicomachean Ethics of Aristotle. Those were the two books, okay, of political philosophy in the Middle Ages. They had an enormous impact. That is why they were translated from Arabic into Latin and also from Arabic into Hebrew. And if you ask me why in Arabic, I mean, didn't Aristotle write them in Greek? Yeah, Aristotle wrote them in Greek, but early on in the Middle Ages, they were translated into Arabic, and it was from Arabic that it went all over spread all over the medieval world. Okay, so Aristotle's Ethics was an extraordinarily, influential book in the Middle Ages, translated from Arabic into Latin and into Hebrew. And then it was called in Hebrew, get this, Sefer Hamidot.
What was called Sefer Hamidot in Hebrew? Which
Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics was called in Hebrew, yes, Sefer HaMidot. That was the Hebrew title of the book. The same title as the book that we're going to study, but it ain't the same book.
How do you tell people? I'm learning Sefer HaMidot. Well, like which one? There's so many of them.
That's why I said that Sefer HaMidot is not the title of a book. Rather, Sefer HaMidot is the title of a genre. Okay? And to get back to that 14th century book that I mentioned, Sefer HaMa'alot HaMidot, which is almost the same title. Okay, what does he mean by Ma'alot HaMidot? What he means, Ma'ala is something nice, great, good. Okay? What he's saying in the title is the book of virtues. Because Sefer HaMidot means a book of both virtues and vices. Midah can be either good or bad. Whereas if you entitle a book Sefer Ma'alot HaMidot, you're trying to say it's the book of the virtues. You're only talking about the good side. You're only talking about the Ma'alot. Okay, I hope I haven't confused people too much yet. Are people with me? Okay, all right. So again, to sum things up, Sefer HaMidot is not the title of a book. Sefer HaMidot is the title of a genre. The word midah means character traits in the generic. It's neutral. A midah is neither bad nor good. Okay? If you want to talk about virtues and vices, if you want to talk about something bad or something good, you have to have some kind of description to say good midot or bad midot. as in the term ma'alot hamidot, the virtues. Okay? Even though Aristotle himself in Greek, he didn't use neutral terms. He talked about virtues and vices. Okay? Good things and bad things. To now get to our book, the author of our book, whoever he was, we don't know who he was. Scholars have been trying to identify him for a couple centuries already with not a lot of luck. Okay, I was able, because of this manuscript, to narrow down the time when this author lived to approximately the year 1400. Okay, the book was probably written roughly around the year 1400, meaning roughly a little over 600 years ago. How can I prove that? I can prove that simply because the manuscript, the earliest manuscript, which also contains the end of the book, which you are going to study and be the first people in the entire history of the world to study, at least for the past 600 years, okay? That manuscript is, listen up, it's a copy of an abridgment. It takes each chapter of the book and abridges the chapter. Okay, what does that mean? That means that after the author wrote the book, people started to copy it. And after they started to copy it, well, one guy who was copying it decided, I don't want to copy the whole thing, so I'm going to take each chapter and abridge it. It's kind of too bad he abridged it, because the book itself isn't actually very long. I mean, there are books that really need abridgment. This one didn't. Okay, and even though Don's volume there looks a little bit thick, it's because it's facing Hebrew and English pages. When you print this in Hebrew, it's like 200 pages in big print. Okay, it's really not that long a book. Each chapter is maybe 10 pages on average, and the chapters are not boring. They're not repetitive. They're really to the point, and it's kind of too bad that somebody abridged a copy of this book. So, the author wrote the book. The book was copied. One of the copyists decided to abridge it. And then a copy of that abridgment found its way into a manuscript in 1430. Okay, that means that by 1430, it was written and copied and abridged, and even the abridgment was copied. So I'm throwing out that it probably took at least about 30 years for that to happen. Okay, that if that manuscript is from 1430, a copy of an abridgment, then probably the book was written sometime around the year 1400. Okay, it couldn't have been written too much before 1400. Okay, for the simple reason that the book talks about the expulsion of the Jews from France. Okay, and the author talks about this like a memory. Okay, from some time ago. So we have somewhat of a framework, you know, how late could it be written and how early could it be written, and it seems to have been written in about the year 1400. And scholars before this thought it was somewhat later, more like around the year 1500. But that cannot possibly be. So what do we have? We have an author whose name we don't know, who seems to be either an exile from France or descended from exiles from France, who writes a book on ethics, gives it the title Sefer Hamidot, which is not the title of a book really, it's the title of a genre. Who's the most famous person who wrote Sefer Hamidot, whose name we do know? Hello? I told you. Aristotle.
Oh.
Aristotle wrote the Ethics, okay, which was translated into Hebrew under the title Sefer Hamidot. And the guy who is writing our book appropriated that title for his own. And I want you to think about what that means. What? Silverstein translated it into English, from Hebrew to English. So I want you to think about what that means. What that means is he's saying that Aristotle wrote a book on ethics, a very well-known book on ethics, one of the two most important books of political philosophy in the Middle Ages. And now, you know what I'm saying? I'm saying that Aristotle's book on ethics is not really good. Or perhaps more specifically, it's not really good for Jews. Jews need a different kind of Sefer Hamidot. Jews need a different kind of book on the virtues and the vices. Aristotle's book won't work for them and is certainly not sufficient for them. Okay, yes, Miriam? So Miriam says, hey, you know, Aristotle wasn't a very religious guy. I think there's a lot to that. It depends what you mean, of course, by religious. Aristotle proved the existence of an incorporeal God. So he had something that people today would probably call religion. But it certainly wasn't God in the Jewish sense. You know, there's a famous statement by Judah Halevi where he differentiates between the God of Aristotle and the God of Abraham. Aristotle's God wasn't Abraham's God. And the author of this book is saying that Aristotle's ethics are not the Torah's ethics, even though both of the books talk about virtues and vices. Okay, and as we read the introduction, we're going to touch upon why Aristotle's system wasn't good enough for the author of this book. Okay, and if we take Midah in the sense of measurement, well, what is the yardstick by which we measure virtues and vices? How do you know when a character trait is a virtue? And how do you know when it is a vice? The author of this book has a different yardstick from Aristotle's. Aristotle's yardstick was the intellect. Okay? You look at people's behavior. From them, you learn about their inner tendencies. Okay? And you say whether those tendencies are virtues or vices based upon the intellect. How does the intellect help you? Can the intellect measure morality?
That's the Rambam, right?
Well, the Rambam would say yes.
Yes.
Because the Rambam adopted Aristotle's ethics.
Right.
Right?
So
All
it's
right.
not totally un-Jewish because Rambam obviously.
All right, because the Rambam brings it into the Jewish tradition. Okay. As a side point, not connected to the topic, I'm currently rereading a book where the author, right in the introduction, says, "I'm doing Jewish philosophy, and I'm doing it in a very non or anti-Maimonidean way. My book is not Maimonidean, and you know, when you say that something is Jewish because Maimonides, you know, brought it into the Jewish tradition, well, you know, not everybody thought that what Maimonides did was such a good idea. Let's take the root of the thing. The root of the thing is Aristotle, and it's reflected in Maimonides, that the intellect measures what is a virtue and what is a vice. So let's ask it again. Can the intellect measure morality? Common sense. How does common sense measure morality?
Yes.
Oh, well, go ahead. So Miriam says that common sense tells us that it's not good to murder somebody. Okay? Well, if we're talking about morality, character traits are related to morality, right? Okay. Is it always not good to kill somebody?
self-defense, right? That's when you can.
All right, we can bring up all kinds of, ethical issues and dilemmas and what have you. But remember that what we're really talking here is not about an act. What we're talking here is about a virtue or a vice, about something inside of you that makes you feel and act a certain way. So instead of talking about murder, which is an action, let's talk about a virtue or a vice. But phrase it correctly. The tendency to lie, the tendency not to be truthful. Is that a virtue or a vice, ladies and gentlemen?
Tendency to be truthful? Sounds like a virtue.
Okay, Zvi says, Miriam says, it's a virtue.
But although I do want to, if I could just add,
Yeah.
agreeing with Miriam that,
Yeah.
some of these things are common sense, and it's if you have the head on your shoulders, you're not going to go do stupid, murder people, whatever. So on the one hand, I agree with Miriam, but on the other hand, when I thought about it more, if you think of the history of the world and some of the great dictators and who have done pretty awful things, they weren't stupid. They were awful, but they weren't stupid.
Can't hear you speak. Get
They weren't
closer to your-
stupid. Okay, they weren't stupid. That's what I'm trying to say. The great, terrible dictators of the world who did awful things. So they weren't dumb. So they're, let's say, good intellect. They weren't stupid.
Okay.
Pretty awful. They're doing pretty awful stuff.
I'm gonna say something terrible based on what Zvi just said. Okay? Those demagogues, not only did they do what Zvi said, it's even worse. When they did that and when they motivated people to do that, they invoked common sense.
Right, sure.
Except for the ones who invoked religion and did horrible things.
All right. Well, can religion be part of common sense? If you can invoke class struggle as a common sense thing, or you can invoke secular nationalism as a common sense thing, I don't totally see the difference.
I think also we're talking about Western civilization.
Yeah.
There are many tribes in which murder is accepted and it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so don't limit yourself in that case
under
to Western civilization. Yeah, it depends on the circumstances. They're
talking about murder or killing, which are two different things.
Yeah, well, all right, they're talking about killing, sacrifice,
right.
Human sacrifice, of course.
Okay, let's take this down a bit. In terms of I'll just state one thing clearly. In terms of intellect or even common sense, okay, I'll tell you right up front immediately that the author of the book both states and claims and even tries to prove that intellect and common sense are not a sufficient yardstick for the virtues and the vices. Okay, and instead he's going to have to come up with a different yardstick. That's number one. Number two, again, we keep talking about murder, which is an act, but we should be talking about the virtues and the vices, like the tendency to tell the truth or the tendency not to. The tendency to be pleased with your situation or the tendency to be mad at it. Okay? The tendency to be kind to others or the tendency to be indifferent to others. Okay? Can you use intellect and common sense to decide which of those are virtues? Which tendency of those is a virtue? Or which tendency of those is a vice? Aristotle said yes. And Maimonides said yes. And the author of this book says no. In other words, the author of this book is anti-Maimonidean. Even though he respected Maimonides and quotes Maimonides, but he never quotes Maimonides in a way, okay, that backs up Maimonides' philosophy. He uses Maimonidean material for his own purposes. Okay, I'll let in Simcha. Just 1 second. Okay, I readmit Simcha. Now, let's go to our text. Okay, let's go to our text. The text that I'm going to choose, I hope you all can see the text now, yes? Do I
No.
need to share it?
Not yet.
Nope.
I can make it bigger for sure. I can make it a lot bigger. Wait.
It's
Control.
not even small. It's just not
No,
there at all.
it's not on the screen at all.
You need to share your screen.
1 second. Where's Control Plus? Oh, all right. Hold on. Hold on. We'll
I just share it in the Midreshet group.
Wait. We'll get it. Okay, first we'll share the screen. We'll share this. Yalla. All right, share. I know this. I mean, I've done this 100 times already, but I'm not finding it. Now, where's Control Plus? Now, here's Control Plus.
Now we have it. Now we have it. It's there. We can see it.
Yep.
It's a little small, but we can see it.
There. I see. Okay, 1 second. I can just reduce it. Okay. Here, what I'll do
Now
is
we
I'll
can see pretty well.
smaller.
Don't.
Okay. Now is the text both visible and clear to everybody?
Yes, it is.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, good. So here, what do we have here? We have the title, Sefer Hamidot. We have my English translation of the title, which would be the Book of Virtues and Vices, because he's using the neutral midot in order to talk about both good midot and bad midot. As a matter of fact, what we'll see in the book is that for every single midah, he shows you when it is a virtue and when it is a vice. In other words, even what we would call a vice, a bad midah, sometimes can be good. And even what we would call a virtue, a good midah, sometimes can be bad. And he systematically goes through each and every one and tells you which one is a virtue and which one is a vice. Excuse me, I said that wrong. He shows you for each one how it is a virtue and how it is a vice. For those of you who have studied Maimonides' ethics with me, we did some, I think, fairly recently. Maimonides doesn't do it like this. Maimonides always deals with virtues and vices in pairs. And what Maimonides says is that you have like a slope, okay? At the top you have one extreme, and at the bottom you have another extreme. Like you have, say, generosity at the top and stinginess at the bottom, and you need to locate yourself in the right place on the spectrum. The virtue is the point on the spectrum that is balanced, and both the top and the bottom are vices. In other words, the top is not generosity. The top is like to have unlimited giving, okay? And the bottom is to have no giving. And the virtue of generosity is a mean somewhere on that slope. If you describe things that way, then you always have to deal with pairs. You always have to deal with two extremes and compare them and then talk about where the golden mean is on the slope. The author of our book does not do that. Instead, the author of our book, he may present pairs. He may first have, say, humility and then pride, but he never says that humility is a virtue and pride is a vice. Rather, what he says is that humility is often a virtue, but sometimes a vice, okay? And pride is very often a vice, but it is sometimes a virtue. He deals with each one independently. But you can read his chapter on humility, and it's not dependent on his chapter on pride. You can read his chapter on pride, and it's not dependent on his chapter on humility. Each one stands individually, and each one has elements of both virtue and vice. That's why I translated the title of the book as the Book of the Virtues and Vices. It was written by Anonymous in circa 1400, like I explained before. And if you look at the footnote, I hope it'll take me to the footnote, but it's not. If you look at the footnote, I'll go down. Okay, I gave you the common title, commonly known in its printed versions as Orchot Tzadikim, the ways of the righteous, but that is not its original title. It was first published in 1482 in Prague, and the publisher uses the original title Sefer Hamidot, but in bigger print, in bigger letters, he uses this new title, Orchot Tzadikim, the ways of the righteous. And, why did he do that? First of all, maybe to sell more copies. Maybe, if I have a book that'll make me a tzaddik, a righteous person, maybe that'll motivate me to buy the book, more than a book that says Sefer Hamidot. That's one possible reason. Another possible reason is because of what I said before, that Sefer Hamidot is not really the title of a book, it's the title of a genre. So maybe the publisher wanted to say, this isn't just, one of those books on the Midot, and maybe he wants even to distinguish it from Aristotle, okay? He wants to give you a very Jewish title rather than a Goyish title like the Nicomedean ethics. Now, let's go to the text now, okay? Okay, I've given you here the introduction in full, and I've given you the conclusion to the book, its two main parts. Okay, the book is structured as follows. The book has an introduction, and then it has 20-odd chapters on Midot, one chapter for each Midah. At the end of the book, there's 3 chapters which are not about Midot. There's one on repentance, one on the study of Torah, and one on the fear of heaven. The fear of heaven will be important to us because it's going to come up in the introduction. And then, after the final chapter of the book, there is what is called an epitome. Okay? An epitome is something that happened a lot in the Middle Ages, that you'd have a very important work, and somebody would write an epitome of it. Okay? For instance, you have Aristotle's Physics, okay? In its medieval versions, whether in Arabic or in Hebrew or in Latin, the Aristotle's Physics often appeared in 3 different versions, okay? You have the large version, the medium version, and the small version, which is the epitome. Okay. The large version contains all kinds of elaborations and commentaries and discussions that don't actually appear in Aristotle's original book. The median version will be more along maybe the size of Aristotle's original book, but it may not be his original text. And the epitome is to shorten it into like an abridged version that you can use for easier reading or you can use for review. Or an abstract maybe. Okay, nice. The academic term for it is epitome, okay? And the epitome of Aristotle's Physics or the epitome of Aristotle's Ethics. A scientific abstract in an academic article, right. Nowadays, the abstract appears at the beginning. Here, here he does it at the end, and what he does is the following. I can't see your phone from here. E-P-I-T-O-M-E. E-P-I-T-O-M-E, epitome. Well, I'm listening to Miriam. Okay. I guess this has a surgical meaning that I wasn't aware of. Okay, what is an epitome? An epitome, it doesn't just shorten the book. Sometimes what it does is, it's a microscopic version of the book in all of its structure. Sefer Hamidot, once again, is an introduction and chapters, one on each midah, and then 3 chapters on other topics. And then at the end, it has a conclusion, which is its epitome. So what does the epitome have? The epitome has introductory words, which parallel the introduction to the book. Then it has a micro version of each and every chapter. And then it has concluding words, which are a micro version of the epitome itself. Okay? It's a microscopic version of the book as a whole. I have both edited and translated into English the entire epitome to Sefer Hamidot, which does not appear in any of the published versions. And what I gave you in the text, in the WhatsApp link, is the introductory words to the epitome and the concluding words to the epitome, all of which parallel the introduction to the book. I didn't give you the summaries of the individual chapters because the summaries actually are quite frankly boring. What he does in the summaries is he very briefly in a sentence or two says, like, hate. Hate is very bad, but hate can be good in X, Y, Z. Okay, he tells you where hate is bad and where hate is good. Where stinginess is bad, where stinginess is good. He does that in the real chapters, but in the real chapters, he does it, it's fun. He uses parables, and he gives you examples, and he cites Midreshet, and it's interesting to read. But when he does it in the epitome, it's just dry. It's like 2 sentences usually for each one, and it's rather boring, so I didn't give it to you. Okay, so that's what we. Yes?
Yeah, that use of the word epitome is very interesting because I've always thought of epitome as the top, the acme of something.
Mm-hmm. That may be what it means. It means like the essence of the book, the most important ideas of the book. It may be in that sense. Okay? Like, as Miriam says, like we use a scientific abstract today. Okay.
Actually, we use it commonly to mean what Marian just said, but I just looked up the etymology, and in Greek it meant literally to abridge, and to put that abridgment at the end.
There you go. Thank you. Okay. So that basically gives us our information, and I think we can start reading. Okay, the introduction to the book begins with a verse. It's the last verse of Ecclesiastes, Megillat Kohelet. The verse says, "The end of the matter, all having been heard, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole man." Okay, Sof davar hakol nishma. Et ha-Elohim yira, ve'et mitzvotav shemor, ki ze kol ha'adam. That's the last verse of Ecclesiastes. Modern scholars say, yeah, some pious person pinned that on the end of the book to make the book sound more pious. I don't know how convincing that is. I think Ecclesiastes may be a bit more complicated than that. But for our purposes, Ecclesiastes, after investigating and asking so many hard questions, finishes with a verse like this. I've raised so many questions, and I've looked for answers, and I've been confounded by so many problems, and all I can say is this: fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole man. Fearing God in the Bible, it doesn't just mean to be afraid of God. Fearing God in Genesis is used for keeping away from certain kinds of ungodly actions. Like when Abraham goes down to Egypt, and then the Philistines with his wife Sarai or Sarah, he says that I thought to myself, Rak ein yirat Elohim b'makom hazeh, v'haraguni al devar ishti. I thought there was no fear of God in this place, and they would kill me for my wife. Okay, people who would do some terrible action are called people who lack the fear of God. So too in the book of Proverbs, there's all kinds of, many times, the fear of God is mentioned in Proverbs as something which keeps a person on a good and straight path. Okay. Can I have someone read here? Someone willing to narrate? Beginning with Solomon? But if you do it, it doesn't work.
Okay.
Okay, it has to be someone on Zoom. Okay, who was that?
Yeah, I will.
Oh, with pleasure. Thank you, Marian.
Okay. Solomon was the wisest and greatest of all men. He was king over earthly and celestial beings. After he had seen every sort of activity, tried all things, and made known all sorts of wisdom, he concluded all of his words by saying, "The end of every matter is fear of the Lord." And thus he began, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Proverbs 1:7. And he ends, "A woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised."
Okay, what he's saying is that Solomon is considered the author of the wisdom books, of the Song of Songs and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. So it was Solomon who said, "The end of all the matter all having been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole man." And it was Solomon who wrote Proverbs. At the beginning of Proverbs, he says, "The end of every matter is fear of the Lord." And at the very end of Proverbs, he says, "A woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised." So the fear of the Lord is both at the beginning of his book and at the end of his book. And it's also at the end of Ecclesiastes. The fear of God was wisdom for Solomon. One.
And Solomon was the richest of all men, as it is written, "And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones." For him it was proper to say, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And one ought not to be busy himself with anything save for the fear of heaven. And thus did Moses, our teacher, peace be upon him, say, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God?" And thus did David, the king, peace be upon him, say, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom."
Okay, look what we have here in this paragraph. We have the wisest of all men, Solomon, and we have the greatest of all the prophets, Moses, and we have the greatest of all kings, David, who was called Messiah, okay? And they all talk about the fear of the Lord. Now, it was especially Solomon. The first paragraph was only about Solomon. You know, if you have somebody walking down the street saying, the only important thing in the world is the fear of the Lord, well, you can say, oh, that's what you think. You got nothing better to do, okay? But if it's Solomon who reached the pinnacle of every human endeavor, what do humans endeavor to accomplish in life? To become wealthy, to become wise. Solomon achieved all of that more than any other human being. And even Solomon came to the conclusion that nothing is as important as the fear of heaven. Neither wealth nor wisdom. For Moses, not even prophecy, okay? And notice what Moses said. He says, "Now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God?" Think about what that means. You say to a Jew, what does God require of you? So if the Jew is traditional, the Jew will say, well, God requires all the commandments. But that's not what Moses says. Moses says the only thing that God really requires is fear of the Lord. That's the only thing that God really wants. That's it. Now, fear of the Lord may lead you to keep the commandments, okay? But if you just keep the commandments out of rote, out of habit, or for other reasons, because people are looking at you and they expect something for you. If you keep the commandments not for the fear of the Lord, this verse would imply that even keeping the commandments is no good. And finally, David backs up Solomon by saying, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, meaning you cannot be truly wise without the fear of the Lord. I'm gonna whisper and tell you what he's hinting at. What he's hinting at is telling you that a wise man without fear of the Lord is not really wise. He's thinking of Aristotle. Aristotle was not really wise because despite all of his supposed wisdom, despite all of his philosophy, Aristotle had no fear of the Lord. That's going to have an impact on ethics, okay? Can you be ethical without fear of the Lord? Aristotle thought yes. Okay, go on, Marion, please. Oh, one second. One second, a question, yeah. Okay. Miriam is raising the question, you know, is it right to say that a person without God, an atheist, that a person without God is immoral? Is it right to say something like that? Is it correct to say something like that? Is that what the author is suggesting? I suggest that we keep that open, okay, and let him speak his part. Okay, but it's a good question. I miss it. You grew up in a moral or an immoral? Immoral society? Okay. Okay, Miriam found immorality in the society where she grew up, and she connected that with a lack of okay. Okay, Miriam is now disagreeing with that and saying, no, it's not true. There is not a correlation between morality and having God. Not having a correlation. It's an important point. As a question, is there a correlation between God and morality? There are people who think yes, and there are people who think no. I suggest we let the author have his say and hear what he has to say. Okay, now go on, Marion, please.
And because we see that man is the choicest of the creatures of the Creator in the lower world, for he is perfected in the image of God and in his form, and is more pleasing in his workmanship than all other creations, and he has within him the intelligent soul which contemplates the secret of the upper and lower worlds. From all of this, we know that he is the chief object of all intentions in the world, and that everything that was created in this world, all of it, is for his need.
Okay, stop there. He's now talking about what a human being is. He says the human being is the choicest of all creations in the lower world. What he means by the lower world is planet Earth. In the Middle Ages, you have planet Earth, and then you have the spheres in the heavens above. Things up above in the heavens are much more perfect than planet Earth. But if we're just looking at planet Earth, the most perfect thing is a human being. And the human being is in the image of God and in his form, and more pleasing in his workmanship than all other creations. I can prove, based on the final chapter of the book, which we're not going to study, that he means two things here. He means that a human being has a body and a soul. The soul is in the image of God, according to the author, and the body is more pleasing in its workmanship than all other creations, meaning the human body is more wondrous than the body of any other creature in the world. At the end of the book, he has this elaborate metaphor, which shows how the entire cosmos, okay, is reflected in the human body. The human body is what's called a microcosm, okay? It's a miniature universe. So you have God in the universe. God gives life to the universe. The universe the universe is a living organism, and it gets its life from God. So too, the human being has a soul which gives life to the body. Okay? The soul is like God, and the body is like the cosmos. That's what he does at the end of the book, and that's what he means by the image of God. The image of God is not the whole human being. The image of God, according to the author, is the soul. This, of course, is based on a dichotomy between body and soul, which can be debated. Okay, you don't have to agree with it. The Bible and the rabbis probably didn't agree with it. But in the Middle Ages, this was a very popular view, that the body and the soul are two different things. Then he says something wonderful. He says that the soul is intelligence. It contemplates the secret of the upper and lower worlds. In the last chapter of the book, there's a beautiful passage where he describes how the soul, a human being is not like other creatures. A human being walks on planet Earth just like a rabbit does. But a human being also walks in the heavens. A rabbit doesn't. How does a human being walk in the heavens? The human mind is capable of contemplating the heavens, of measuring the heavens, the science of astronomy, and of understanding how the heavens, how they work. Okay? You know what that means, says the author? That within the soul of, I said it wrong, so I'll say it correctly. The soul of a human being is greater than the entire cosmos. And it has to be. He gives a beautiful analogy. He says, you cannot take all the waters of the ocean and pour them into a little bottle. Therefore, if the soul of a human being can encompass all of the cosmos, can attempt to understand all of the cosmos, it therefore must be greater than the cosmos. Otherwise, it could not contain the cosmos. That's what he means here, that he has within him the intelligent soul, which contemplates the secret of the upper and the lower worlds. From all of this, from the fact that the soul encompasses the universe, and that the soul resembles God, who gives life to the universe, and that the body is a microcosm of all of the cosmos, from all of this we know that he is the chief object of all intentions in the world, and that everything that was created in this world, all of it, is for the need of the human being, although not for the need of the body, rather for the need of the soul. Now please go on.
Okay.
I have a question.
Please, yes.
It says, let me find it again. For he is perfected in the image of God and in his form. The word his is capitalized, which is obviously an interpretation because the Hebrew wouldn't differentiate. Why is it capitalized? Because that would seem to imply we're talking about God's form God's body, which we either do or don't believe in. What's going on here? Why is it capitalized?
It's capitalized because there is masculine and feminine in Hebrew, right? But some
No. But does it? If capitalization implies that it refers to God's form, not human beings' form.
Let me answer your question.
Okay.
His form is a translation of Tsalmo. If it was feminine, her form, it would be B'Tsalma. Okay?
I'm not questioning the gender.
It's based on the biblical verse where it refers to God explicitly. Even in this sentence, it's the image of God and his form.
But the question is, I'm not talking about gender. I understand about that issue. It doesn't matter. But if it said lowercase his, it would refer to the form of the creature has certain characteristics.
Oh, man.
Capitalizing it implies that it's God's physical form we're talking about, and that's a problem.
Wow,
no?
Wow.
So why is it capitalized?
Okay, it's capitalized because that is the plain meaning of the verse in Genesis. However, be aware that your interpretation exists in history. Okay?
Yeah, I know, but
okay.
Does he mean it here?
I think it's impossible to argue that he means anything else here, because he's just basing it on the verse, and the verse itself is clear. However, there is that interpretation. That interpretation, what it does is, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. There's an interpretation there. There's an interpretation there that goes as follows. The verse, for those who are listening and don't know what the question is about, the verse says as follows: and God created the man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. For many people, that was problematic because of anthropomorphism. Okay, it sounds like a human being looks like God. For those,
and the Torah looks anthropomorphic a lot.
Yes, but for those who wanted to take anthropomorphism out of the Torah, they reinterpreted the verse. Not only did they reinterpret it, they even had to edit the cantillation marks, because the cantillation marks follow the plain sense of the verse, which means that the human being is created in the image of God, which implies that it's the whole human being, even the body. Okay? In order to avoid that, it was necessary for those people to say, hey, there must be an error in the cantillation, which divides the phrases and the words. And you divide it like this: Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. God created the man in his man's own image, like Elisheva wants to say. B'tzelem, in an image. Elohim bara oto, did God create it? Okay, the two parts of the verse are parallel, and there's no reason to think that the cantillation is an error. Okay.
What I'm asking is, this author, which way does he believe?
So I told you how he believes. Okay, man is in the image of God and in the form of God. Period.
So he believes that God has a body.
No, because he divides between body and soul. He says in the final chapter, what is the image and form of God within man? It is the soul. That's how he avoids anthropomorphism.
So by form, he doesn't mean body.
Form for him, as in the verse in Genesis, is a synonym for image. And both of them in his interpretation are referring to the soul. That is not, by the way, what the plain sense of the biblical text means, but that's how he takes it.
Okay.
So your question is very, very, very in place. It's correct. Okay, but that's not what super in particular means. Okay, let's go on in the text now. Therefore was man. Go ahead.
Okay. Therefore was man given a true Torah to teach him the upright way. For man is very dear to the Lord, since we see that even the angels serve in supplying the needs of a righteous man, as we see in the case of our father Abraham, and so too for Isaac. And similarly for Jacob, who said, "The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads."
That's referring to Ephraim and Menashe. Right? May the angel who has redeemed me bless my grandsons. Okay, go on. We'll give more examples now.
All right. And it is written, "He strove with an angel and prevailed." Hosea. And Daniel said, "My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouths." And we have seen that an angel came to aid the righteous. As it is written, "It came to pass that night that the angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians." And there are many instances like these.
Okay, to make a long story short, angels come from the heavens above, and angels serve the righteous man. That must mean that the soul of the righteous man is greater than the angel.
Yes.
However, as we'll see, you can also degrade your soul, and then the angels will not service. Right? We see that it's only the righteous people that the angels are serving. Okay? Okay, bevakasha.
Okay, we have long known that there is a man who has greater excellence over other men, even though they are all created in one form and all of them have one foundation, except that the soul of one man has ascended to the spiritual heights, for he caused his wisdom to rule over his desire, while the other man has caused his desire to rule over his wisdom. And therefore, he walks all his days in darkness and feels his way like a blind man in the thick darkness.
Okay. Not all souls are alike. It depends on how you live. It depends on what rules you, your desires or your wisdom. Okay. Go on, please.
There are 5 senses in man. The first is the sense of hearing. The second is the sense of seeing. The third is the sense of smell. The fourth is the sense of taste. The fifth is the sense of feeling, or that which a man senses when he touches anything. These 5 senses are all functions of man, and no work is done without at least one of these 5 senses. And the mind works through them, for the 5 senses bring to the mind every matter, and every deed, and every thought are influenced by them. The mind has many characteristics. For example, pride, humility, memory, forgetfulness, sorrow, joy, shame, and impudence. And there are many more like these. And all of these thoughts or qualities are strengthened by the one possessing all 5 senses. For the blind man cannot pride himself as though he could see.
Okay, this is very interesting. What he's saying here in a simple sense is that all character traits are influenced by life. Life does things to you. Life makes you more angry, or more pleasant, or more forgetful, or better at remembering things, or more sorrowful, or more joyful. Okay, it's what you go through and how you react to it and how you live with it that strengthens or weakens various character traits that you have within you. Thank you so much, Miriam. Okay. The character traits don't just like exist exist in some kind of a neutral state. They're always being worked by life, by the things you go through, that you experience through your five senses. Okay.
Therefore, every man who reflects should try with all his might to attain the final good. For if a man reaches a good state or elevation, then he will always desire to ascend to the degree which is higher, until he will finally attain the ultimate good, and in this manner he will reach the world of reward, which is the world to come. Long ago, David longed to attain the good of the world to come, when he said, "Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have laid up for them that fear you." And he said, "They are abundantly satisfied with the fatness of your house, and you make them drink of the river of your pleasures." And this degree no one can attain except he be worthy of it. As he said, "Who shall sojourn in your tabernacle? Who shall dwell upon your holy mountain? He that walks uprightly and works righteousness," and the rest of the matter which is said there.
Go ahead.
And since we have mentioned the advantage of the qualities of man, it is only fitting for us to explain their importance and their blame, their goodness and their evil, until there will stretch in front of the intelligent person a straight path, and he will reach the courtyard of the king, if his soul will choose good qualities with all its might. For since a man has choice, he may throw aside the husk and take the fine flour. How can this be? There is a certain type of man that is a man of wrath, who is always angry. And then there is a man who is calm and never gets angry at all. And if he does get angry, it is a very little anger and occurs once in many years. And there is a man that is exceedingly proud of heart, and there is another man who is exceedingly humble. And there is a man who lusts, and his soul is never satisfied with following his desire. And there is another man, very pure of heart, who does not desire even the few things that the body needs. And there is a man with so many desires that his soul would not be satisfied with all the money in the world, like the matter that is spoken. He that loves silver shall not be satisfied with silver.
Okay, so we have all kinds of different people with different character traits. Give more examples.
And there is one whose desire is so limited that everything is enough for him, even in the smallest quantity, and he does not seek to obtain all his needs. And there are times when he afflicts himself with hunger and gathers each morsel and does not eat a penny's worth that belongs to him, except with great anguish. And there are times when he throws away his money with his own hands knowingly. And in this vein, there are the rest of the characteristics.
For example, go ahead.
Okay. For example, one glad, one sorrowful, one miserly, one liberal, one cruel, one merciful, one tender of heart, and one brave of heart, and all similar traits. And of all of these characteristics, there are some which a man has from the moment of his creation, according to his physical nature. And there are also characteristics which the nature of this particular man is more prepared and more ready to receive quickly in the future than other characteristics. And there are those qualities that do not belong to a man from the beginning of his creation. But a trait that one must use in many places. And there is a
Marian, please hold now. We had a hard time hearing you at the end. It was kind of strange, and your voice kind of got electrified. And so we need to stop at the end of this paragraph.
Oh dear.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We need to stop at the end of this paragraph to ask a question. Well, what he has said so far is that you have all of these different traits, and different people have different traits, and sometimes people are the opposites of each other, even at extremes. One person is extremely one way, and another person is extremely another way. And what we haven't figured out yet is, how do you decide what is a virtue and what is a vice? In other words, what is the yardstick? You know, one glad, one sorrowful, one miserly, one showing liberality, one cruel, one merciful. All these examples that he gave, he hasn't rendered any judgment on them. We don't know when these things are virtues and when these things are vices. Okay? Now he's going to begin. We won't see it all tonight, but we'll see the beginning of it. He's going to begin to show us how to know when something is a virtue and when something is a vice. That is the next two paragraphs, where he has a very, very beautiful metaphor, which we'll end off with tonight. Marian, I'll ask you to try, but if the electronics doesn't work, then either I will read or somebody else. And give it one last try, beginning from there is a certain trait.
There is a certain trait that one must use in many places, and there is a trait which one should use only a little. And all of this is like one preparing a dish for which he needs vegetables, meat, water, and salt and pepper. Now, of all of these ingredients, he must take from each one a certain measure, from this ingredient a little, and from this ingredient much. If he puts in too little meat, the dish will be meager. And if he puts in too much salt, then the dish cannot be eaten because it is too salty. And thus it is with all traits. If he puts in too little of what he requires much, and puts in too much of what he requires little, then the food will be spoiled. And the expert is the one who can take of every ingredient the proper measure. Then the food will be pleasant and sweet to those who eat of it.
Okay, just read the next paragraph where he explains the metaphor, and we'll stop there.
Okay. In a similar manner are the qualities of a man. There are qualities of which he ought to take much. For example, modesty, embarrassment, and their like. And there are qualities of which he must take only a little. For example, pride, impudence, and cruelty. Therefore, when a man weighs his qualities in the balance of the scales, let him take from every quality its proper measure. He should not take less, and he should not add. In this way, he will reach the ultimate goodness.
Okay, so has he given us a yardstick? What he has given us for sure is this metaphor that human character traits, midot, are like a cooked dish. They can either be tasty or disgusting. Right? It depends on whether you use the right amount of each and every ingredient. So has he given us a yardstick for virtue and vice? Well, one second. Don says, I think, that he has given us a yardstick, and the yardstick is, so to speak, our tongue, okay? If you find a person tasty, right, then you see that that person has good character traits, has lots of virtues. And if you find a person not tasty, how do you say not tasty in one word? I don't know. All right, if you find that a person is not tasty, then
distasteful.
Thank you, distasteful, right? Then that is a yardstick or an indication that the person has lots of vices. So do we have a yardstick? Okay, so Miriam, once again, Miriam basically responds to Don, and she says, that's not a yardstick, because al ta'am v'reach en lehitvakeach, we say in Hebrew, that it's not worth arguing about how do things taste good or do they smell good, because everybody has a different opinion. In other words, it's not a yardstick because who is tasting the dish? Okay? You know, like if I look at a person and that person seems wonderful to me, like taste to me according to this metaphor, right? Then what that person has seem like virtues to me. But am I the person who should be measuring? Maybe somebody who has a better sense of these things will look at that same person and the person won't seem so tasty. Okay? Maybe somebody else will be able to see the vices in that person that I haven't picked up on. So we have Don, what? Yeah. Okay. So we have Don who says, like, it seems like this is a yardstick, right? If it tastes good, then it's virtue. If it tastes bad, then it's vice. And Miriam says, yeah, but who's doing the tasting, right?
Exactly.
It's all in the eyes of the eyes of the beholder. So what we have here is perhaps we have a start, okay, but we don't. But it may not be. It may not be enough. Okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I just want.
Yes.
I want to say something that you've already alluded to, and also the author, that
Yeah.
is maybe not for each individual to use looking at other people, but the yardstick is more from the Torah, or the qualities that are already mentioned as positive.
Yeah.
He says here toward the end, in this way he will reach the ultimate goodness, which is not a thing that you would judge or I would judge, but the ultimate goodness in
nice.
More
nice.
Torah's idea.
Kathy, that's nice. He already told us a few paragraphs ago what the ultimate goodness is. Anybody remember what it is?
Fear the Lord.
Well, just a few paragraphs ago, he said that the ultimate goodness that a person strives for is the world to come.
Yeah,
Okay? Now, who decides who gets into the world to come?
Hashem.
You think it's God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe all this business about the tasty dish, the dish is meant to be tasty not to me or not to you, but to God. Okay? Perhaps we're not going to see that tonight. Okay? We'll as maybe next week we'll see whether that's the answer or not. But before we even get to that, we'll have to leave that open for now. But before we even get to that, I want you to notice something else about this metaphor. Okay, there's something very, very nice about this metaphor. What are you doing? Yeah. Yeah. Miriam is pointing to this sentence. The expert is the one who says, of every ingredient the proper measure. When he says expert, he's talking about human beings. He's not talking about God. He's saying the expert human being is the one who knows how to make a tasty dish out of himself or herself, right? I know how to use each midah in the correct measure, and thus I will become tasty, according to the suggestion that people made now, to God. Okay? But I want you to all note something about this metaphor. There's something really, really cool about this metaphor. The metaphor is a cooked dish. Does the dish taste good, or is the dish distasteful? That would seem to be binary, right? Either I like it or I don't. And even if you think it's God, it's still binary. Either God likes it or God doesn't. Okay? But if you take the sentence that Miriam pointed out, that the expert is the one who can take of every ingredient the proper measure, okay? There's a possibility in here which is very, very cool. The possibility is this, okay? This is all a metaphor, but you know, when you use a metaphor, even the metaphor itself has to have meaning, okay? And here the metaphor is a cooked dish that somebody's going to eat. Now, let's think about that. Do you only eat one dish? Is there only one thing in the world which is tasty?
No.
Hopefully not.
No. Hopefully not, right? You wouldn't, even if it's very tasty, you wouldn't want to eat exactly the same thing all the time, right? Now, think about this. Think about this. He's telling each person to look inside himself or herself at all of the character traits within our souls, okay? When to use more and when to use less in order to make a tasty dish. But maybe the tasty dish is not the same dish for each person.
That's what I was going to ask about.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Some people love chili. Some people hate it. Some people can't stand cilantro. So is the person, and some people love it. So my concern is the next slide, that it will be pleasant and sweet to those who eat of it.
Yeah.
My concern is that if people are so concerned about pleasing people who are going to be eating, or to take the metaphor, pleasing others, rather than pleasing God, that could send them off in a tailspin, and they'll become a people pleaser rather than looking at the larger picture.
Kyla, it's a good question. Kayla, it's a good question. Remember, the people have already suggested that maybe the taster is God. Okay?
Yes, I do.
But regardless of that, regardless of who the taster is, okay, I think this implies individuality. In other words, how is it individuality?
Yes.
When I look inside myself, I'm not trying to make myself into the perfect tasty dish. Rather, what I'm trying to make of myself is a tasty avi. And when Kyla looks inside herself, according to this metaphor, she's trying to make a tasty Kyla. And a tasty Kyla I did it again, I'm sorry. A tasty Kyla.
With an A.
With an A. A tasty Kayla is not the same dish as a tasty Avi. And a tasty Avi is not the same dish as a tasty Don. And so on and so forth. In other words, what you're supposed to be doing is looking inside of yourself at your character traits and saying, in order for me to be a better person, what do I need to put in balance? Okay? But it's not one model of perfection that everybody needs to be identical to. Okay, that's what I think is a cool potentiality in this metaphor. We're going to have to stop now, okay, each week at 10 to 9, because I'm physically in Kilat Hakerem and I have to get the bus. If it was totally on Zoom, like we had earlier, it wouldn't have to be that way. So I'm going to sign off, and thank you for your participation. All of the questions great on the image of God and who is the dish for, and you really added a lot to the discussion. And next week we'll see where he's able to go with this metaphor and what the yardstick is. So have a good week, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, really great.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom in the meantime.
Shabbat Shalom.
Yes, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
It's already Shabbat.